Ça va bien?
Ça va très bien. Et vous?
Okay. Oui, oui, je vais très, très bien. So our next presenter is Nita Chhnizer. Um, and she's going to be talking about what employers want, and which is really a great topic because it's always that if only we can get into the head of an employer and be able to anticipate what they want and how we can really present ourselves and how we can game this thing and then be able to be able to win, and that would be really amazing. So you have to know that Nita is a professor of human resources management at the Department of Management of Western University, right?
University of Guelph.
University of Guelph, sorry, University of Guelph. Research and teaching are focused on business consulting, change management, and decision making, with a specific interest in downsizing and layoffs. She's also a trusted HR advisor, consultant, award-winning researcher, and best-selling author of Canadian human resource management issues. In addition to her PhD in management, she holds an MBA and an employment law certificate. Nita is an active contributor to the HR community as an advisor at both the Canadian HR Reporter and Governance Professionals of Canada. In addition, she currently sits on the board of directors at the Toronto Centre of Learning and Development, as well as Hospice Toronto. And you can get her information on her website, www.nitachhnizer.com. And it's my pleasure to introduce, and please welcome Nita. The floor is yours.
Perfect. All right. So I did have a slide set that's been provided, but I want to focus in on what's unique right now. So I'm going to try to do a screen share, and let's see if I'm able to successfully do that. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So what I want to do really is give you some selection hints and advice. Let's go to the slideshow. So specifically provide you with expert information about where and how employers look for work, what considerations impact what applicant is offered the jobs, and then some tips to better compete for jobs in today's complex world. I'm going to skip over this because I realize that there's a lot that's on the agenda for today. But the big talent trends that are going on today is that voluntary turnover, so that's people who are leaving their jobs voluntarily, quits and resignations, early retirements, those are all down since the pandemic hit. So this is according to statistics that were gathered across Canada in October 2020. So this statistic is relatively new, and we're seeing that there's less frictional employment. So for those of us who are recruiters or who are in the activities that are involved with recruitment and selection, that voluntary turnover rate is actually going to cause us to start looking at whether or not the right types of people are staying in the organization and being strategic about that. But that also means that there's going to be less jobs that we need to hire for. Us as potential employees, that means that as applicants, there's just less jobs available that people are hiring for because there's less frictional employment. So people are holding on to their jobs while they can to ride out the uncertainty. And the second thing is that this uncertainty is actually going to continue to put pressure on compensation. So we're looking at a downwards trend in the growth of compensation. Conference Board of Canada came out with some statistics last month, and they had surveyed a number of compensation experts. And our numbers are the lowest that they've been in terms of compensation growth since 1994. So they're looking at a 1.4, 1.5% potential growth in compensation, which is pretty much just at the inflation level. So when it comes to looking for new jobs and when it comes to offering new jobs, we know that that compensation and the concept of total rewards is going to be somewhat depressed. So there is less room for negotiation now for salaries and wages for applicants, but us as recruiters, we need to hold the party line on that because the labor cost component here is putting a depressionary pressure on compensation. The other thing that we're seeing is the gig economy. So gig economy and contract workers usage is up. So that's a good way for us to get people into the company, bring in someone on a contract, bring in someone temporary, bring in someone as an intern. And there's a lot more people in the market right now who are willing to take on those kinds of jobs because they're just trying to make it through the uncertainty that we have right now. But we know that when we get exposure to an employee, that gives us a fair chance to evaluate not just their competencies for the job, but also their fit with the organization, their professionalism, their maturity, whether or not they're reliable, dependable, all of those competencies that are often hard for us to assess on a resume. So these opportunities, like contract work, allow us to get access to a relatively interesting pool of talent in a temporary condition. And I think that we should really continue to explore these opportunities to bring people on in a potential full-time permanent role or part-time permanent role. We know that there's been a big discussion also about equity, diversion, and inclusion. And the terms that we're hearing in the media is BIPOC. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and Persons of Colors. So I want to remind you that while those are the things that are being discussed in the media, in Canada, employment law has got the 4 designated equity groups. And our 4 designated equity groups are much more actually inclusive and broader than BIPOC. So we have visible minorities, which includes Black and persons of colors. We have Indigenous persons. We have persons with disabilities, as well as females and gender identity in our equity. So we have to think about equity in the Canadian scope. Although the BIPOC conversation is big, we want to make sure that we are eliminating some of the biases and securing better representation, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. The other thing that we know, recruitment and selection is largely online, so there are now virtual interviews, there are now video interviews. Your opportunity to meet people isn't just limited by your geographic scope, and that increases the pressure that we feel as recruiters. So as we move to online platforms, we really have to think about this idea that, sorry, have I stopped sharing my screen yet? Yeah. We really have to think about this idea as we move to online platforms about weeding out a lot of the different kinds of applicants who might not be a good fit. So for example, if you're trying to recruit from LinkedIn or you're trying to recruit from Indeed, those screening questions that you have, you're allowed to ask screening questions. You want to really capitalize on that so that you're not overwhelmed as a potential recruiter here to say that there are so many different screening questions and I've got 3,000 people applying for the job because the unemployment rate is so high and I have a large geographic scope. So use those screening questions to ask very specific questions. The specific questions that you should use for those screening questions are questions that are specific to the job. So when we ask broad questions, if we were to ask how many years of experience do you have in a certain marketplace, that's too broad. If you want to ask someone, have you ever led a project in the space of this IT? Or do you have experience with the HR Professional Association? Are you working towards a designation? Do you have any education in XYZ? We should ask those questions as our screening questions so that we can actually go ahead and screen through that quite well. But overall, what we're seeing is that there's been almost a shift. So as the unemployment levels came up, us as recruiters got to not just ask for our must criteria, we also got to ask for our want criteria. So as more people are competing for jobs, we're not just looking anymore at what does the education level mean, or what does it mean for them to have a bachelor's in something, or what does it mean to have 5 years of education? We have a lot of applicants coming in with that. And as a lot of applicants come in with our base level requirements, we could get a lot more picky about those other requirements. Let's talk about what those other requirements are. So we know that what we do at work is actually a mix between task performance and context performance. Task performance means, are we able to complete the tasks of the job? Are we able to actually do those things that are job specific? So are we able to type at a certain speed? Are we able to publicly speak? Are we able to be bilingual and effectively communicate in writing and other formats? Are we able to do the math required for the job? But then there's context performance. Context performance is the thing that now you can get a little bit more picky about. It's those things such as being punctual, looking for effective time management skills, looking for someone who is dependable, looking for someone who has continuous learning. How do you evaluate these things when these resumes come up? Well, one of the things that we know is that continuous learning is a large predictor of whether or not an employer finds a candidate employable. So if we were to control every candidate in terms of they had the same amount of experience, the same amount of education, the same amount of everything, research shows us that their GPA, the grade point average, how well they did in school, becomes less relevant than if they continued to learn. So have they been taking courses along the way? Do they have any form of micro-credentials that might be transferable to us? And it puts the pressure right now on the employee to come to the table with those micro-credentials because it's a highly competitive labor market right now. So we want to look at not just what have they done leading into it, but those extras you can find. The extras also come in terms of what someone does outside of the workplace environment. So for example, in the workplace environment, perhaps we are participating in projects. Perhaps we have volunteered in some capacity. Perhaps we have led an initiative. You want to look for that contextual performance. Now, a little bit more aggressively in those resumes as you're reading through many, many more resumes. I'm going to quickly change slides here. And I realize that we have a time sensitivity. So I'm going to switch to the slide. There we go. And this slide here is about referrals. So we know first that networking is the one best way for people to secure jobs. So the best way for us to bring in good candidates is through referrals. Referrals increases the productivity of the worker, increases the loyalty of the worker who did the referring. It's got lower turnover rates, and surprisingly, people who are referred generally have lower compensation levels because they feel that they have something to prove and that they're coming in on a bit of a favor. So what do we know about the research when it comes to referrals? If we want to get our employees to refer candidates into our organization, then we need to think about two things. How much effort our employees will put into helping us get introduced and network with potential candidate comes based on their external motivation as well as their internal motivation. So external motivation, are you offering your existing employees any bonuses or any referral fees? Are we incentivizing our existing employees in ways to encourage them to help us find good talent in the labor market right now? And then beyond that, what is the internal motivation? So how are we going to recognize and enhance the employee's reputation? And how are we going to build that commitment of that employee to the organization so that they want to see the organization succeed? So we have internal motivation and external motivation that result in the referee actually putting in the effort to bring a good candidate into the table. Now, that referee, of course, isn't going to blindly just bring in every candidate. They're going to go ahead, our existing employees will go ahead and start thinking about their networks and say, wait a minute, before I vouch for this person, can I legitimately say that this is the correct person? So there will be some information exchange. So in this case, it's very important if you have critical job postings, if you're looking for someone through networking, that you share the full job ad with your internal employees so that they could refer to the job and they know who to ask for more questions. So if someone contacts them who's a great potential candidate and they say, hey, I just want to know a little bit more about this job or this organization, that employee who's acting as your face on recruitment will actually be able to answer those questions. If they're able to answer the questions, then we know that those employees who are bringing in the referral actually start to make decisions. They start to say, wait a minute, what's my risk here? Is this person going to be a good fit for the job? How much social relationship do I have to this person? Before they will come to us as the recruiters with these jobs to say, oh yeah, this person's a great fit for the job. So when we look at this, we're really talking about this idea that we have to minimize the risk for our referees. So if you're going to use networking, which you should be doing, and if you're going to use employee referrals, a big important task for you is to make sure that you've minimized the risk and provided the information as well as the internal motivation for your potential referrals within the organization or your referees within the organization. So we know the number one way to find jobs is through networking. And it's not necessarily through LinkedIn, it's through these personal, intimate, professional networks that we have. So let your existing employees know what jobs are available, create some reward system for them, reduce the risk. Don't hold them personally liable if the person they recommend doesn't work out. But reduce the risk, and then also make sure that you've got the exchange of information as you might need. Now, I've only got a few minutes left, so I want to be very selective about what we talk about next. And I think what we need to talk about is biases. So I'm going to do a quick screen share with you. Just so you know, I do have my full website, my full slide set available, but I'm just limiting myself here. So what we know, at the surface level, biases exist. So in resume screening around the world, ethnic names that are outside of the ethnicity of the hiring committee actually do get overlooked more. And we know that it's not common practice in Canada to include a picture or personal non-work related variables like age, date of birth, marital status on our resumes, but some people still do it because they're acclimatizing to the Canadian environment or because they've been told otherwise. So at the surface level, these biases exist. However, the deeper dive here is that the ethnic biases are actually not significant when we focus ourselves on job fit, when we think about whether or not the skills, abilities, etc. are related to the job. So if you want to reduce your bias as a potential recruiter, I highly encourage you to think about this idea of job fit. How well does this person fit for the job, and eliminate some of that unconscious bias. If you've got multiple recruiters, I do suggest that you also think about the concept of doing unconscious bias training. It's a little bit of an awareness training that helps us to at least open up the conversation about the kind of biases that we introduce as recruiters in the recruitment process that reduces the diversity. So the overall themes that we covered off is that there's a lot more talent available than there was before. And that's having a depressionary impact on compensation, but also opening up a lot of new people applying for your jobs. So in that case, what you want to do is filter them a little bit more on the onset using existing technologies and screening questions. Second thing we talked about was the concept of implicit biases and how that affects what's going on. The other thing we talked about was the concept of referrals and bringing in people to your organizations through effective networking. So although that was a micro version of what I wanted to talk about, I hope that I did hit on some very meaningful points for you.